Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming today to this press conference. Yesterday was a very big day for the country. I wanted to make myself available to answer any questions about the government's innovative efforts to diversify our economy. Yesterday, as you know, the Prime Minister introduced the government's white paper on digital assets. As he noted, digital assets have grown in a few short years into an industry with a $3 trillion market capitalization. The opportunities in this market are enormous. We feel strongly that we can leverage our expertise and successes in financial services to create a digital assets hub here in the Bahamas. From the first week of this administration, we have been determined to build a framework that would allow us to not just participate, but to lead in this innovative industry. At the same time, and as with any new industry, particularly one that changes so quickly, such as the digital assets industry, it is important to protect our reputation and to protect our consumers. So we know that getting our policies and regulations right matters enormously to setting up ourselves for success and to protect the jurisdiction. I want to be clear. Our policies are designed to encourage growth while keeping bad actors out. In addition, as we have developed the white paper, we are very focused on the policy goal of making sure that as this industry thrives in the Bahamas, opportunities for Bahamians to participate both as consumers, investors, and in their professional capacities can experience the economic growth as well. I want to take a moment to explain a little bit about the blockchain technology that enables digital assets and will underpin the growth of the industry in the Bahamas for the benefit of the Bahamian people. Blockchain is an open distributed ledger that can record transactions between two parties. It creates a record of all these transactions that is encrypted end-to-end and cannot be altered, providing the security which makes cryptocurrencies viable in the marketplace internationally. Blockchain technology has the potential to revolutionize financial markets and be a material player in the evolution of the financial services industry and development of financial technology business solutions. We didn't want the Bahamas on the outside of this revolution looking in. We know we can make major contributions to this industry, and we believe we can become a digital asset hub and a leader in the international financial technology solutions as an industry. We have consulted extensively with the regulators and financial and legal experts, and we believe that our white paper positions us to become a leader. We have ensured that as part of this policy paper, which sets out the framework and goals for positioning the Bahamas and growing the industry, that we have focused on absolute measures to ensure Bahamian participation. Fundamental to this work that is already underway with the University of Bahamas is to develop a degree and certificate programs in digital assets. One must understand this fast-moving industry to be able to professionally thrive in it, and we are committed to ensuring those opportunities exist for Bahamians. Another component of our economic diversification strategy, the Prime Minister also tabled a very important piece of legislation yesterday, the Climate Change and Carbon Markets Initiatives Bill. As you would know, the Prime Minister has become an important voice on the global stage, urging action to reduce global emissions. We are all very clear that climate change potentially poses an existential threat to our island nation. Over time, all of us, countries, corporations, and individuals, will make the transition from fossil fuels to renewable and clean energy sources like solar and wind and other forms of gasification. During this transition, however, our existing energy infrastructure and certain industry elements within our economy will continue to emit carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, as will those throughout the world. One way that companies and countries can compensate for those carbon emissions is to buy carbon credits. That is, they can, in many cases, and are required to, pay for the activities that remove carbon from the air. So if they are emitting carbon dioxide, they could buy credits to offset their emissions. So think of it as a positive and a negative, and the goal is to get to zero. If you are at a positive state, you can buy negative to get to zero, and this is the underlying theory of the monetization or the sale of carbon credits. They pay for these activities that remove carbon from the air. There are green carbon markets. These carbon markets are generated by ecosystems on land, like forests. And these are rather well established internationally. But science has shown that among the most efficient carbon sinks, the most efficient regime or setup in nature that absorbs carbon are mangroves and seagrasses, thought of as the blue carbon, which is what the Bahamas is looking to pioneer. We intend to lead the way in blue carbon and to work with world-class scientists in order to map and verify our mangroves, our seagrass meadows, and ensure we first have the necessary knowledge to take advantage of this market, but also have an eye to preservation, protection, and enhancement of these all-important carbon sinks. All Bahamians are very aware of the dangers of climate change. We are part of the climate change solution worldwide. And we want to be compensated for the role that our country plays and can play in removing carbon from the atmosphere. The legislation tabled yesterday in the House of Assembly by the Prime Minister sets up us as the Bahamas as forward-looking innovators in the field of blue carbon. We are ensuring that we are prepared and in a place to gain from our natural environment in blue carbon. We will be a leader and not a follower. We will be a definer and not just imitate. Under this New Day administration, we will position the Bahamas at the forefront worldwide, and as we have done in the past, have others try to copy and emulate us in the Bahamas. It is an exciting time for our country. There are exciting things that we are doing. While we are at the very beginning of our journey in both carbon credits and digital assets, we will likely contend with obstacles and uncertainties, as is normal, in both fields. But we are optimistic that we are positioning the Bahamas and the country to participate and lead in these rapidly changing emerging industries. This week, we have taken important, big steps to establish this and establish the Bahamas in this important set of marketplaces for the economic diversification of our country. With that, I'm happy to take any questions on the matters tabled and what I have said today. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Go.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Go.
Well, yeah, I have two questions. I have one on the bill, but I do have another question about these proposed citizenship changes.
You can do the one on the bill.
I would do both. I mean, if that's okay. Two of the signatories to the Constitution, the two living ones, they were critical. They're critical of any efforts to effect changes to the citizenship through ordinary legislation, despite Article 13 of the Constitution, which allows Parliament to bring citizenship legislation. How do you respond to that?
Well, we have failed twice to change the Constitution. And it is an important element of equality of our people that they see themselves equal amongst each other. And if that means doing it by legislation, that's what it means.
Is the government concerned that some people might take government to court if it does this to say this is unconstitutional?
No. And if they take us to court, they take us to court. Everybody takes the government to court these days. Doesn't mean they're right. You clearly stated that the Constitution provides the avenue to provide citizenship that is not covered within the Constitution, which is what this is doing. Next question.
In line with that, would you support a right to a bullet provision for stateless individuals and other persons born in the Bahamas to foreign parents?
Well, those types of questions are questions that go before Cabinet. Those types of questions go before Cabinet.
Is that something that you would bring together?
Those types of questions go before Cabinet. Next question, please, Travis.
Sure. Regarding the bill tabled yesterday, one of the sections deals with domestic mitigation efforts that would bring us in line with the Paris Agreement. All right. Can you talk about some of the measures that the government may implement to curb emissions?
Sure. So think of it as, like I said, a positive and a negative, right? And there are ways to minimize your emissions. One is to actually go in and put thresholds and standards and cause people to reduce their emissions. The other way is to enhance what you're sucking out of the atmosphere. And so both of those we're looking at. I don't think you're going to see necessarily mandated emissions reductions amongst businesses. What you may see is proactive efforts by the government in areas where we see that there may be carbon emissions and carbon dioxide emissions, and take policy initiatives to reduce those. But we'll also look to take policy initiatives to increase elements of the carbon sink that will offset emissions as well. So, one thing that I've always spoken about is when you have foreign direct investment, which we have a lot of, and developers come in and either want to scar the land or do something that may affect the carbon emissions balance in the country, we cause them to plant additional mangroves or do additional remediation efforts to offset their damage plus more. We call it a net zero effect. And so we would look to have anybody coming to do business in the Bahamas appreciate a net zero effect. So they would probably have to factor into their budget some sort of remediation efforts on one side if they're scarring or doing some negative carbon emissions activities on the other side.
So can you speak to the policy of the government regarding any investment that would run counter to that, like bringing an oil refinery or storage facility or any other?
Again, like I said, we would be and we would require a net positive position with respect to that. You can't just shut off investment in the country. But what you can do is put in policies and frameworks to encourage and mandate that you are in a more positive position than when they came. And those are the types of things that we're looking at.
Can you tell us where we are with changing the age of consent and also the cannabis legislation? I know you said it would come this month, or we take it to cabinet this month.
Well, considerations are being presented to cabinet on all juvenile matters. I think I told you that last week. And nothing has changed on that. That's still going to be coming before cabinet. And in fact, I have a meeting this afternoon to further develop the cannabis legislation. So that is still moving forward.
So before you go on, anything that's going to make the Davis administration's cannabis legislation different from the one that was presented by the Minnis administration?
Well, if we thought the one presented by the Minnis administration was the right one to present, we would have presented it.
Two questions, one regarding the DARE digital assets bill, and the other carbon credits. But first, carbon credits, can you tell us or give us an idea of how that would work in terms of would it be investors? How are we going to get money, and how much money are we anticipating?
So to help you with the framework, the rules around trading in carbon credits, and whether they be from green carbon or blue carbon, as we have described, are developed at COP and under the Paris Agreement that we are all parties to, right? Or multiple countries are parties to. So it's an international framework of, one, how you verify, what you can verify, and then how you translate that into actually having to monetize it. And in those instances under the Paris Agreement, those are assets of the sovereign, right? Those are assets of the state. And so it's a highly technical scientific exercise to be able to do proper mapping and evaluations, and also to do proper verifications on how much you're actually absorbing of carbon, because it has to be based in science. This legislative regime is the first step to put that framework together to be able to actively go and do the mapping, do the research, do the verification, and get the understanding in order to be able to advance the process. With your specific question about how much can you monetize, clearly that is still unknown until you are able to properly map and know what the absorption rate and what the scientists and the verification companies are telling you what it is. So that is a continual process as we go. So that regime, what I can tell you is certainly the Bahamas in that exercise is going to look at every opportunity to maximize our benefit with respect to this program. We do think that it is material enough to put in groundbreaking legislation, legislation that you won't see anywhere else around the world. and to be able to create a regulatory and scientific framework to advance the country in that regard. We think it's a material enough to make that investment. How much it really is at this point, we won't know until, one, we've done the scientific basis, and secondly, the rules are further defined at COP later this year, which I think Rochelle's in November, correct? Yeah. And so those rules are still evolving. Now, to the last part of your question, how do you monetize this, right? And so when you look at it, and after you go through the science, and after you go through the verification process, and after you go through the final rulemaking process on this, and you get a dollar figure per ton of carbon that you're absorbing, that's how they measure a credit, then companies and countries will come and either directly negotiate with the country, or there may be a voluntary market where they're actively traded to purchase those credits. Because think about it. If you are a factory in the United States, right, and you have an obligation to be carbon neutral by 2050, then, or 2030, then that obligation can only be met by buying credits, because you're not going to shut your factory down, because that's the business that you're in. You may run a cleaner factory, or you may try to mitigate your emissions, but you're not going to eliminate them, because that's what you do. And you would have seen, if you research this, for instance, Microsoft has already bought some carbon credits to apply in the future, because they know on their manufacturing they're not going to eliminate their carbon emissions. NASCAR, that we know, the car racing series, they're clearly not going to eliminate their carbon emissions, even though they've committed to a net zero position, because they are running, cars that heavily pollute in carbon dioxide. So what are they going to do? They're likewise going to have to buy the credits that are generated from countries like the Bahamas, who find themselves in a net negative position to create the credits to offset their positive. And so that would either be done through direct negotiations with the government, or on what we call the voluntary market, which is an open exchange.
Okay. My question regarding digital assets. So we know the OECD and all of these major international regulators, specifically the OECD, is going through a consultation process right now, I think until tomorrow, the 22nd of April, or maybe next week. Have we been involved, or have we responded? Sure. And what are some of the, I guess, the key concerns the Bahamas has put forward in this brand new industry that the entire world is trying to...
Well, it also goes beyond the OECD as well, right? It goes to the FATF, and part of their 40 recommendations. There's a virtual asset service provider regime that you have to meet, which are the actual companies involved in this process, right? And the AML requirements that they have to meet. So it's both. The OECD looks at it from a transparency point of view, because that tax transparency is their big focus, and the FATF looks at it from an anti-money laundering point of view. And if you would read the white paper, you would see that we've taken careful consideration and steps, and even have referenced the OECD and the FATF with respect to their international best practices, and that we will be committed to doing that. In fact, the Securities Commission has anti-money laundering rules out for public consultation right now, dealing with virtual asset service providers and how that is going to apply to them from an anti-money laundering point of view. And as we're always strive to be fully compliant with international best practices while allowing us room to grow the economic model as well. I think that is something that the PLP administration has done far better than the F&M administration in managing our compliance, but also managing our growth areas. And it's something we're cognizant of. We've taken a lot of time and effort in our white paper to make that clear. You would have heard the Prime Minister speak yesterday, speaking about necessary regulation to ensure that we only have good actors and not bad actors. And so that is all taken into consideration, and that is all being certainly reviewed in real time as we further develop our policy positions and implement the policy positions that we've assured people in the white paper we'll do.
I think just over a week ago, you spoke to us at Cabinet. Outside at that time, there was a group of people, I guess, protesting, and you had said, I think by this week there would be a cease and desist order issued. Wanted to update on that situation. Has that happened?
Yeah, and so with respect to that, certainly there's a cease and desist, but with respect to that also, there's a framework that you go forward with I could only prosecute when people are arrested, right? And so we have a framework of what we know is the requisite regime and violations of the requisite laws, and we've done that work from our side. So we're ready in such instances that there may be an arrest.
Here, obviously, over the past few months, there have been some challenges with the courts, specifically the coroner's court. Have we seen the return of the coroner's inquest? And if not, when can we see return of those jury trials?
Well, yeah, I think, you've seen return of coroner inquest. Now, with respect to the coroner courts, certainly we met a lot of challenges that have been there for a long time, and we're working through those. And it's not just specific to the coroner's court. You would have heard the debate on the court bills yesterday, and you have heard a number of members of the opposition make the point, and rightfully so. It's not a new point, and it didn't just happen overnight. But one, state of facilities of the courts, and two, if we're adjusting the thresholds and the jurisdictions between the Supreme Court and the magistrate courts, do we have the capacity to do that? And I could assure you that we have been working hand in hand with the Chief Justice and the judiciary, of which the courts fall under his mandate, in order to ensure both, one, the coroner's court is working functionally, but also all of the courts are working properly. And these bills yesterday look to cause for the administration of justice in our courts to be more efficient and more effective as best we can, and we will continue doing, whether it be modifications to the law or whether we be doing, as we described a number of times, creating specialty courts that would help for the more expedient and proper administration of justice. Because at the end of the day, much of what we do falls on how fast we can get trials to court, matters to court, trials conducted, and decisions handed down. And that has a reciprocal effect on a lot of things that we do. So we're working hand in hand on that.
So just a clarification, so those inquest matters have already started, or have they not started?
I'll have to check with the coroner on exactly what the timeline is.
And I guess while I have you here as well, we saw a significant number of those matters that require inquests, like the police-involved shootings over the past year. How realistic is it that we will be able to get through this backlog in a timely fashion? What is maybe like a time?
Well, I hope rather realistic. Now, it's not just a one-issue deal that causes this, right? So you have issues such as timely ballistics reports. You have issues such as DNA evidence and getting DNA evidence back in a timely fashion in order to run these types of prosecutions and to be able to have the evidence in a framework. And all of those elements, not just the courts, add to that. And so we're working on all of those matters simultaneously.
Are there any plans to settle with former Minister Ken Dorset?
I haven't even seen the petition, so that's rather preliminary.
Sir, the government, the white paper introduced yesterday, the framework and all of that. But people are engaged in the industry now. What are the current rules?
So, one of the issues with Bahamians being engaged in the industry now has to do with exchange control, right? And the central bank will take the position that you need to convert your B dollars in order, through the international currency market and the legitimate framework, in order to be able to go and invest those in whatever you're going to invest in. In this instance, you're talking about digital assets. And that has always been, in my view and many others' view, is a serious impediment to Bahamians having foreign investment because of the premiums they charge and the process and the bureaucracy involved, right? And so you would see one of our commitments in the white paper is to work with the central bank to ensure that we can have a more flexible framework for Bahamians to be able to participate utilizing B dollars within the digital asset framework and cryptocurrency framework. Central bank has their thoughts on the issue. We have our thoughts on the issue, and we hope at the appropriate time, we'll come together on the issue. We, as you would know, we are setting up an advisory committee and a policy committee that will be working on this. The policy committee is headed by the Prime Minister and has both the governor and the executive director of the Securities Commission on that with him to make distinct policy recommendations on these. So we thought that was rather important to have the head regulators at the table with the Prime Minister in order to be able to get to these decisions. You have the advisory committee below it that make up these recommendations and frameworks and send them up to the ultimate policy committee to make that decision. And so that's why you see the breakdown in the white paper between these committees and how we're going to make an approach to the policy changes. But we have said in the white paper that we would work towards Bahamians being able to invest in cryptocurrencies utilizing B dollars, and that's something that we are going to work with the regulators to ensure that we get to.
AG, one question regarding the citizenship issue. I know that Damon Allen drafted a bill under the previous administration. Is this government going to use that bill as it is, or amend it, or is there going to be a new bill?
There's going to be a new bill. Now, some of the concepts in that bill will be utilized, but if you would have seen that bill, I don't know if you saw it, about 111 pages long, and addressed a number of different issues related to immigration. And so, you know, we think a better approach is to do an issue-by-issue approach rather than what we would have seen in the bill.
And then with the carbon credits bill.
Oh, there you go.
How long would it take to set up that regime?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question, right? As I said, we are going to be in real time doing the scientific research that is required for us to be in a position to execute. And that is going to be happening this year. I mean, that's going to be happening in real time. At COP in November, rules will be developed to better, especially in the blue carbon space. As we said, the green carbon space is a little bit more aged and has a little bit more of a firmer regime around it than the blue carbon space. We're actually pioneering the blue carbon space. So when we go to COP and we have the special environmental advisor in the Office of the Prime Minister here who will be attending and helping frame that up, we will be framing up the rules for blue carbon and how to participate in that. You know, certainly we think that the process to start looking at where we are on a monetization, maybe 12 months, maybe 18 months. It depends on how COP goes, frankly.
All right, we have one more question for this section. I know that Tyler, Shelley, and Theo has not asked a question. I'll allow your question only if they don't have any. Final question, Travis.
Has anyone approached us about purchasing our blue carbon credits? I know we haven't set up the regime yet, but has any entity approached the Bahamas in that regard?
Yes. We don't have the regime.
Yet.
We don't have the regime in place, nor are we confident that we have done what we have to do to ensure the Bahamas maximizes its position. So, you know, people will come out of the blue all the time. I want to buy your carbon. I'll buy all the carbon credits you can create, and this is the price. Well, you know, the fact of the matter is our responsibility is to maximize the benefit for Bahamians, not jump on, you know, the first opportunity. And so that is the policy decision we have made. Anybody who approaches, we will just put them in a data bank as potential customers in the future when we're ready to monetize.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A lot there to digest, and as it seems that we have a few more questions on carbon credits and the environment, I'm going to invite Special Advisor in the Office of the Prime Minister for Climate Change, Ms. Rochelle Newbol, to come and further answer your questions and explain.
Thank you. Yep, I think the AG's touched on a lot of key points there in terms of his presentation, but one of the questions that we've been asked to explain is, what is the connection with, say, the oil companies in Texas producing in their normal day-to-day business for the oil refineries? They're producing a lot of CO2. What does that have to do with the Bahamas and our offerings of credits? Well, keep in mind, we're on a planet. We're all on one planet, and climate change is the change for the planet as a whole. So when you have industries that are having to make decisions about becoming carbon neutral by 2050, but the technology isn't there and readily available for them to make that change immediately, they need to look at ways in which they can be able to incrementally make those necessary changes to meet that 2050 deadline. Countries like the Bahamas, as we've said over and over again, we do not contribute significantly in no stretch of the imagination to climate change. But what we have is the natural resources that work to try and balance the atmosphere of the planet. When you were in high school and you did biology and they told you plants take in CO2 and they give out oxygen, because we are not an industrialized country, because we're not a heavily developed country, we have a lot of those, what they're called sequestration resources that continuously are taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. And as the AG would have talked about, what we need and what we're doing right now is trying to quantify how much of that CO2 is being taken out of the atmosphere by our resources. When a hurricane comes through and damages the Bahamas, we are suffering infrastructural loss, we are suffering environmental loss, and we would then need to understand, well, how is that tweaking the balance between who is putting stuff in the air and who is taking stuff out of the air? If we are doing a great job of taking stuff out of the air, we should be compensated for that. And that's what the climate credit regime is about. Once we can say we're taking 40 million tons out of the air, we will have a number that looks at what the IPCC reports that were out recently, and you all reported on it, and it talks about, hey, if we continue on this road, we're going to miss the 1.5 degree change, we're going to be heading into a 2 degree change. All of that then falls back on us. But we also need to have an understanding that our country needs to develop, our people need to have a livelihood, we need to have jobs too. So there's got to be a balance as to how we do it. And there is an agreement in place under the Paris Agreement. The countries such as ours, if we have opportunities to benefit in the climate finance space in terms of making an offering about what we are naturally doing against what our developed partners are doing, so we could reach that equilibrium, then that's an allowable play. And as was said, countries have run ahead and committed themselves in the carbon market. So this isn't 2020. Things have been going on in this field for a while, but we are not going to be so quick to make an offering if we don't have a full understanding. But what we need to do is to ensure and to make sure that people understand we are not offering a black market approach. We're not greenwashing. This isn't an environmental escape clause here so people can continue doing what they're doing in terms of emissions. No, this is all going to be based in science. It's all going to be verified on a global stage. We're not solely making this introduction. We will have an oversight regime, a verification regime that is outside this country, that's in a global space, that's going to be independent. And once we get the validation and the stamp of approval, then we will be in the best position to make an offering into the international market. As the AG said, we are leading this space. I want the Bahamian people to understand we are at the forefront of this. We're not behind following someone's example. We're taking control of this destiny. We're trying to make good on a bad situation here such that we can still exist as a country and we can still move forward as a people. And that is why we continuously talk about the youth and the empowerment of the youth. What we're starting today, they will have to carry through. Now, we know we have a 28-year window to make the best of this offering, because by 2050, everybody is supposed to be carbon neutral. Technology is supposed to be such that the things that we rely on heavily, which is petroleum-based energy products, are not available. There will be alternatives. And some countries are trying to push it to 2060. Some people are trying to push it to 2055 because they, in and of themselves, countries like India and China that rely on coal, we also need to be sensitive that their people need a time of adjustment. But then we also need to understand that while they're adjusting, we can't continue to be suffering. And this is one of those climate finance offerings that would help us help them as we all move forward as a country.
Any questions for Ms. Newbol?
How many countries are part of the carbon market right now? Like, how many countries are participating?
Everything in the carbon market right now is on a voluntary basis. So it's difficult to say 20, 50, 100, we don't know. It's on a voluntary, and it's bilateral. So the Bahamas with whomever, so you don't necessarily are aware of what they are, but come November, everything is going to be streamlined, everything is going to be streamlined, so that all of us are understanding what this playing field is that we're all trying to be a part of.
So the AG spoke about the mapping process. Have you guys began that, and how extensive is that? How long do you see that taking, like, what's the scope of what we have to offer?
So when you look at the Bahamas is an archipelago of islands that run from north to south. And we're also a vast body of water. We have a vast ocean offering. So we would have to be mapping not only our terrestrial, but our aquatic resources, and that's going to take some time. How long that is going to take, I can't necessarily say, but it's not going to be like next month or anything like that, because it has to be scientifically proven. And to make sure when you are going to verify anything by science, it has to be methodical. You have to make sure you have your hypothesis and your outputs and your results and your analysis and all of this done. Once that is done, the thing about the way this process is going to run, once that is done, it has to be repeated to make the verification reach the prime spot. Because today, we could say we mapped our forest along Carmichael and the back roads to Pine Yard. And yesterday, somebody came in and cleared a whole bunch of it. So now what we thought we had yesterday is not what we have today. So that's why the re-verification, the remapping, the re-evaluations will always be required. As long as we're in this market space, we will always have to prove that what we're offering is genuine and is true. So there will be no room. There will be no room for the carbon washing or the green washing or any sort of black market approach to the carbon credits. And that's why the Bahamian people have to be a part of this process. If you go on the OPM's website, you will see the bill. You can review the bill. Anything, any gaps, any questions, any concerns about how we intend to engage in this space, we're asking for people to come back with their responses at feedback@bahamas.gov.bs, because you are a part of this. This is something that's going to be entrenched in how we do business in this country. This is going to be something that the next generation is going to inherit. So we want to be in this space together.
So, I mean, once it's set up and we're trading and we're getting proceeds from it, is there any particular area where we're putting these funds into, like replanting new mangroves or into solar technology or what have you?
So look at carbon credits like if you run a farm. If you offer an organic product on your farm, you got to make sure your soil and everything is prime. No pollutants, no pesticides, no everything. Once you make your first harvest, you got to go back and you got to plant another harvest to keep it going. The same thing will be with the credits. If we're going to do our mapping and we say we have 2,000 acres of, say, seagrass beds for offering, why wouldn't we go back and plant some more seagrass beds so we could have an even higher offering? So it will be upon us, the responsibility will be upon us to continue to reforestate, to continue to replant our mangroves, to continue to plant our seagrass so we can always have an offering.